This is Greg Troutwine with Maritime Reporter TV, and we're very pleased to be joined today by Bill Doyle, the CEO of the Dredging Contractors of America, for an inside-out view of the challenges and opportunities in the U.S. dredging market. Bill, I know the most watching know the Dredging Contractors of America, but to start us off, can you give the elevator speech overview of DCA, its mission, and a by-the-numbers look at the organization that gives a size and shape to it and its activities?
Yes, Greg, thanks for having me on today, this morning. Really appreciate the time that you take to discuss dredging in the dredging industry. So the Dredging Contractors of America is an association of dredging contractors. Not only dredging contractors, but most of these companies also do marine construction. So if it's in the water, they do it, construction and dredging. They're also very entrepreneurial. A lot of these companies started over 100 years ago. And they may have started with a barge or a tugboat, and then they've built these businesses and these companies up over the years, both at a local level, regional level, and national level. So they are primary contractors with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They also work for counties and ports. Any solicitation that goes out anywhere in the country for dredging, these companies apply to those solicitations to get the bid. It's a very, very competitive industry. If you just take the federal side for 2022, we just came down with the numbers. There were 52 different companies that were awarded contracts by the Army Corps of Engineers. So it's a highly competitive Jones Act marine dredging environment. So that's what they do. They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, round the clock, not just on the coasts, but on the Great Lakes. So the Great Lakes has dredging as well, and there's several companies on the Great Lakes that do dredging.
You know, as I said, I've been covering this market for 30 years, but I'm certainly not a dredging expert. But it seems to me there has been a decided uptick in dredging activity over the past 5 years or so. How do you see it?
Yeah, I agree. There has been an uptick in dredging, and a lot of that had to do with the expansion of the Panama Canal. So when the Panama Canal expanded, it expanded quicker than the states, the Gulf Coast states and the East Coast states and the ports therein could react. So because the funding of the federal channels where the large ships, both container ships and your tankers, including LNG tankers, the money for those federal channels comes from the federal government, which means that Congress has to authorize it, appropriate that funding, president needs to sign it and get into place. So when the Panama Canal expanded, it only allowed really one size ship to come through for 100 years. And that was, for lack of a better term, the 4,500 TEU container ship, okay? When it opened, now you're up to 15,000. So 3 times the size of ship can come through the Panama Canal post 2016 that could go through the past 100 years. So in order to do that, the East and Gulf Coast had to do a few things. They had to right-size their equipment. So you'll see day in and day out monthly reports on new cranes coming in and infrastructure. But dredging was the big part. And it was always, you got to get to 50 feet. So your federal channels, now 45 feet will do it, but you predominantly here, we got to get to 50 feet. So most of your channels are now being dredged to 50 feet. Some are even going more. And that's on the East and Gulf Coast. So that uptick in dredging for depth and also widening. So why not widen it as well? So you can have, in some of these ports, you need two-way traffic coming in and going out. So you saw a lot of that. That was an uptick. And that will continue because then you have maintenance dredging after that follows. Also, the environmental side. So you have a lot of work that goes on due to the amount of storms, both to fix what storm damage created and also build better and bigger so that you can protect for future storms. And you see that in the coastal restoration and in the beach nourishment. So that is upticked as well. So those are some of the big things that we've seen over the past 5 years that have increased the amount of dredging.
You mentioned the Panama Canal as the big driver for dredging, but when you look at the market today, currently, what do you see as the primary drivers for dredging activity? And, just looking at it holistically, what are the busiest parts of the country for dredging right now?
Well, dredging, we're still continuing with, like I said, the Panama Canal and post-Panama Canal expansion. So if you take a look around the, basically the Eastern Gulf Coast, the major ports that you're seeing, or the ports that are continuing to dredge at an accelerated clip is, you've got the Port of Virginia, all right? And I'll get into these later on in more depth into what to expect over the next 10 to 15 years. But you've got Virginia, Savannah, Georgia, which is expanding exponentially, and you've got Jacksonville. Then you come around and Mobile, Alabama, Houston, Texas, Corpus Christi, Texas. So those ports are still in those phases of expanding, right sizing, and opening up more opportunities in the United States for shippers. And now, when I say shippers, people say, "Oh, the ships." Well, shippers are the people, beneficial cargo owners, the folks that actually put the goods onto a ship. Okay, and we saw during the pandemic that the United States needed to, up its game on gateways. Okay, we can't rely on just 2 or 3 ports for 80% of our products coming in and out of the United States. We need to expand that. And if you're, say, a retailer, Target, Walmart, you're going to want as many ports to land your goods as possible in case something happens in a port by way of infrastructure or some unforeseen event. So that's what you're seeing by way of these ports and their expansion projects. And you know what? It makes it competitive. So the more ports, make it competitive. You're not locked into 2, 3, or 4 ports in the United States. It's a really good thing, Greg.
Much of the equipment that is charged with keeping these waterways cleared, to put it kindly, is a little past its prime. It's an older fleet. So that said, I know there has been a decided uptick in the recapitalization of the U.S. Jones Act dredging fleet. Can you put some meat on the bone to this in that regard to the U.S. dredge fleet? How does it look to you today? And can you give an overview of what's in the shipyard or the planning stage right now?
So the way you look at it is that the recapitalization that's going on now in the U.S. dredging fleet is probably the largest that's ever had. And a lot of people who follow the maritime industry know what the big shipyards are, okay? But the dredging industry, they use shipyards everywhere for their barges, for their vessels, for all types of equipment. And I'll just name a few of the shipyards where we have dredges, and I want to say $2.5 billion in investment in U.S. Jones Act dredges have been rolled off the blocks in the past 3 years and moving forward. That's the recapitalization that we have right now. So if you look at some of these shipyards, we've got, Brownsville, Texas, Conrad in Louisiana, Easton in Florida. Then you've got Corn Island Shipyard. That's in Indiana. So those scow barges and equipment that are built in Corn Island, Indiana, they roll off and come right down the river, and then they hook up. You've got Mobile Pulley in Alabama, and they're ones that design and construct cut-ahead suction dredges. Gunderson in Oregon, and then you've got Dayton's in South Carolina, and even Feeney's shipyard up in New York. So then you've got to take the entrepreneurship of these companies. They will start dredging their own repair yards. They'll start building it themselves. They all have repair yards for their equipment spread out around the country. And if they have to, and you see them do it, they will start building the equipment, getting the equipment, buying the equipment, assembling, and then the superstructure and the hull and all that may be done in another yard and put together. But that's how, if there's a need and they don't have it, I mean, these guys still know how to operate lathes. So they have lathes in some of their repair yards. And if they're going to build a bolt, they'll build a bolt. If they got to build a piece of equipment or some kind of hardware, they'll build it. So it's really, they're really clever folks, and they're serious about, recapitalizing the fleet. And I'm proud of them. I mean, they're really a big part of the Jones Act industry in the United States.
No. Like I said, personally, I've always loved the dredgers because I come from that kind of blue collar background myself. My father was a tool and die maker at General Motors, and it was from the generation of you didn't go on to Amazon and
That's
something
right.
broke, you go on to Amazon and you find it or you YouTube video it. You actually made it, you created it, and you engineered a solution. So I very much appreciate that. Closer to home, water levels on the Mississippi River are always a concern. There's too much water, there's not enough water. When you look at it today, what's the situation? And an overview, can you discuss the most dire dredging needs on this critical water route?
All right, so if you rewind the tape to about 3 or 4 years ago, okay, we all thought, the Army Corps of Engineers thought, anyone down in Louisiana, anyone on the Mississippi, upper Mississippi River, Dredging Contractors of America, we thought we were in for into perpetuity flooding. Okay, the Mississippi River, you can go back, there's article after article about you have the snow melt, you had the rain in the upper Midwest, you had the Great Lakes, filtering down, you had rain in the center of the country. And when you turned over into January, going into February, March, April, it was flooded. The Carrollton Gauge, they opened up the Bonaccara Spillway, I don't know how many times. They had opened it up 4 times in about 3 years, and they hadn't opened it up, the previously 60 years or something around that line. So you had the spillways opening, and what had happened is the Army Corps of Engineers and the Dredging Contracts of America, we sat down with Corps and said, dredging is a planning. Planning and scheduling is what it's all about. Contracts come out, and then the companies will plan where the dredges will be at a certain time. And if there's an emergency, like flooding, then either you have equipment available or you may need to pull a piece of equipment off of another project and bring it into the Southwest Pass. Okay, the Southwest Pass is the part of the Mississippi River where a lot of the problems and shoaling has to get cleaned out. And that was going on year after year after year. So what we decided to do is, okay, while the companies are planning and scheduling, and while the Army Corps of Engineers is setting their solicitations for dredging, why don't we come up with a program that you, Army Corps of Engineers, put out a solicitation in, say, December, so that one of the dredging companies or more of the dredging companies will designate one of their private sector dredges to work in the Southwest Pass. Should an emergency occur, everyone knows that dredge or dredges will be going to the Southwest Pass to help with the flooding. And it worked out great. And the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, that's a cultural change within the Army Corps of Engineers. But you had both General Semonite and General Spellman right on down, flowing on down into the districts that, look, this is the way we're going to have to do it. This is an emergency. We need to get these ships in and out, and we're going to contract ahead and have designated dredges available. And it's worked well. Now, it's also worked in a sense because over the past 2 years, we've seen nothing but drought down there. So it's kind of the flip of what you need by way of equipment. And what happens in that sense is that the flood is different from the drought because you're not going to get the big ships, the big dredges, the massive dredges up into some of these areas where it's drought. You're going to need smaller size cutter heads. You're going to need clamshell dredges because you just can't get those vessels in there. So, and there's also, other types of dredges, side casters that you can get into the program. And that has been a challenge in and of itself. But, the engineering and, the company cooperation with the Army Corps of Engineers, we've gotten through it. I'm not saying we've got it nailed down, but this was something that we just hadn't seen, let's say, in well over 30 years. We haven't had that problem. We always thought it was going to be flooding. Now, there's a change. We'll see. There's a lot more rain and water and snow this year. So it's, we'll see what happens, come end of February, coming into March and April on the Mississippi River. And will we be back to a flood stage? We don't know. But we continue to work with, the states along the Mississippi River, the Army Corps of Engineers, and our companies are building for these types of scenarios.
Can you discuss contracting ahead specifically as it relates to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers?
Yeah, they do well. I mean, when we look at the, contracting with the Army Corps of Engineers, they're a great manager of dredges. So, the relationship is really, really fluent, and it has to be day to day. Some of my companies, they're probably talking more than once a day with the Army Corps of Engineers, whether that's at the district or the division level. I'll talk to them at the headquarters level. Army Corps of Engineers, but the contracts come out. There was a hiccup during COVID, but that was for everyone. So there was a COVID hangover. They are no different than any other company. The federal government's Army Corps of Engineers, operates in such a way that people get sick. People weren't coming into the office. It was adjusting to the work from home. And it is, at least in the Civil Works Division, dredging, there's a lot of contracts and a lot of work that needs to go out. And, there was a lack of personnel. But once we get into, I would say, about April, May of 2023, the contracts were rolling out. I mean, the contracts were coming out. The companies were bidding on them. And, you basically look at a dredging company. How do you value a dredging company that's in business? Is you basically value them on that backlog. Okay, so how much backlog do you have? And the companies are getting, they're working, they got their backlog up. And I would say that the leadership of the Army Corps of Engineers, I have the utmost respect for all of them, and the staff, the civilian staff, the uniformed service members, and we have an open door policy on, even if there's an issue and problem. I'm one of those guys that I like to solve problems. Let's get it done. If something happened, let's talk about the future, how to fix it. And they like to bounce things off of me first because, sometimes an issue is company to company, company to government. And they'll say, Bill, how can we handle this? What can we do? And hey, well, let's get folks in the room. Let's talk this up and hash it out.
I know priorities can change. But from where you sit today, what are the really big projects that you see on the horizon in the next 10 to 15 years that will most dramatically impact this industry?
All right, so you're always going to have the maintenance dredging and the beach nourishment, okay? And you're also going to see an increase in what's called beneficial use of dredge material. And what that is you're taking the dredge material and you're rebuilding islands. Let's just say the Chesapeake Bay, right? So you dredge the material and then you rebuild the islands. That's going to increase. Okay, that's going to increase nationwide. 30% used to go toward beneficial use of dredge material for coastal restoration, upland replacement, and island rebuilding. The Army Corps of Engineers, General Spellman, Scott Spellman, wants to flip that to 70%. So 70-30 instead of 30-70. So we're going to see that. But when you get into the big stuff, what you're going to see in the next 10 to 15 years, I'll start with something that's very interesting and that my companies are now turning their attention to is what Secretary of the Navy Carlos Del Toro has put out recently. They need more repair yards on the West Coast, shipyards. They want more shipyards. And there is some land available up in California that the federal government owns that will bring dredging opportunities to connect not just those ports. If the Secretary of the Navy and the United States Navy goes in that direction, that will bring dredging and marine construction opportunities for the dredging industry, because the shipyards that you have, they're good shipbuilders. They're great shipbuilders on the West Coast. But what the Navy is saying is we need slots in repair yards so that we can bring our ships in, because as you know, it's no secret, the capabilities of the United States Navy is increasing for the Pacific Rim. That's just what it is. So you see the Navy moving in the direction of, okay, let's start getting our infrastructure built or refurbished, and the dredges will play a big role in that. Okay, so you get to the next piece, I would say, is Mobile, Alabama. All right, so the Alabama State Port Authority, they are building. They've got channels where they're looking at. They're going to be between 50 and 56 feet deep. Okay, so they have, and what you're looking at there is in the range of $366 million that's been authorized and appropriated right now for Alabama. And Mobile, Alabama it's a port that's on the rise. Okay. Next, you've got, if you take a look at Baltimore, it's not so much the Port of Baltimore, Maryland Port Administration, it's Baltimore County. And that's where you have Trade Point Atlantic. Trade Point Atlantic is the old Sparrows Point shipyard. That Sparrows Point shipyard is now being turned into a massive container terminal. And that is with Trade Point Atlantic and Mediterranean Shipping Company, TIL. Okay, so they have a contract, and that is going to require an enormous amount of dredging as well, because, you know, once a shipyard, now a container terminal, that will be positioned for the future. That will require maintenance dredging thereafter. So that is going to be, that's going to be big. Let's say one thing interesting about that. When that container terminal in Baltimore County, Trade Point Atlantic, is completed, I think it'll be the only, if you think about it, the only privately owned and operated container terminal. That's not on state or federal property. That is private property owned by Trade Point Atlantic. And then they've cut this deal with, you know, Mediterranean Shipping Company, TIL. So that'll be an interesting one. And again, going back down to Louisiana, you got Louisiana International Terminal, another container terminal. That is a public-private partnership. That will be with the state of Louisiana. And again, Mediterranean Shipping Company, TIL, and Ports America. And of recent news, I mean, so that's going to be somewhere in the range of a $1.8 billion project. But if you look at it, over $340 million has just been awarded to Louisiana to build that container terminal under the infra grant and also the mega grant. So that's all new. Now, will all of that money go to dredging? No. But a significant portion of that will require dredging and marine construction to build that terminal. Then if you look at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, all right, so they've got their 50-year master plan to they've got the 2050 plan. So, you know, you take a look at the usual suspects that you need to dredge and widen and deepen, because Port of New York and New Jersey, they are behemoth on the East Coast. Hill Van Cowell, Newark Bay, you know, you've got those areas that they'd like to widen, deepen. That's going to stretch into, you know, the next couple of decades. And then where it'd say that, you know, you look long-term past that, Virginia, 55 feet, that's the Craney Island, right? That goes up to 2040. So they want to be 55 feet in the Port of Virginia for the new Craney Island project. And then on the energy side, it's Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi, when you're looking at the liquids, the bulk liquids that are going to come out of there, potentially even, you know, well, definitely natural gas liquids and liquid petroleum. So that will go out, and they're getting deeper and wider and building more. So I see this going on, the expansion, not just your maintenance and sure, but your expansion of where the federal government, states, and private sector are pumping money into the system for dredging. It's a 30-year out.